let's begin with the first question. How many read this week? All right. All right. Well, at least it's growing on people reading every week, right? Wasn't here last week? All right.
I got a good excuse.
Good excuse, all right. That goes right along with the ketchup, right? Yeah. Don't like ketchup. That's a good enough excuse. One's as good as another. All right. Tonight we're going to do an overview of the book of Exodus and look through some things here in this book. There's 40 chapters in it. So some of it is very repetitive. If you went through it, it's like, wait a minute, did I not just read that just a second ago? Over and over and over again. But there's a reasoning behind some of that. We'll look at this. Does anybody know who the author of the book of Exodus is? Moses. All right. That way there ain't no debate tonight, correct? So it's written by Moses, and we're introduced to him in this book as well. The word Exodus means departure or going out. And in this book we find what? We find the nation of Israel exiting or in an exodus from Egypt. The departure of Israelites from the land of Egypt. And we know that this book was written by Moses. Exodus is also a book of redemption. The Israelites have been living under the bondage of Pharaoh. Exodus describes how God delivers them from that bondage. In the book of Genesis, we've seen the fall of man. And in Exodus, we will see the redemption by the blood and the power of God. We begin to see some things. We begin to see more pictures of Jesus Christ as we go into this. We also see what Genesis set forth in prophecy, Exodus records as history. Exodus continues what began in Genesis when Jacob came to Egypt, and there was 70 in total in his family when he came, including Joseph and his sons. There were 70 of Jacob's family in Egypt. And by the time of the Exodus, does anybody know how many men went out in the Exodus? Many years, yes. Yes, it was in the thousands. We'll talk about it a little bit more here in just a minute, but there's roughly 600,000 men that leave out, not counting women and children. So I can imagine, why Pharaoh didn't want to let them go, but could you imagine what that would do to the economy of Egypt? I mean, if you were to assume that all of them were married, there went 1.2 million. If they all had one kid, there's 1.8 million. If they had two kids, there's 2.4. 3 kids, there are 3 million people gone just like that. And people look at that number, and you find later on that when they begin to do it for the tabernacle, that of the men above the age of 20, they were 603,550. So it's amazing how big the number is. We don't know the number because it was a mixed multitude, because some of the Egyptians went with them. But we know of the nation of Israel, there was 600,000 leaving out of just men. So I tried to do the math, and it's hard to make the math make sense when you start out with 70 and you go to 600,000. That means that they'd have to produce 1,400 a year for 430 years that they were down there. But you know, all of that changes over time, and it was like, well, wait a minute, what if you had this and this and this, and then it just grows exponentially. So, and this is God continuing to fulfill his promise to Abraham. He made a promise to Abraham that he was going to make him a great nation, right? Let's see here what I've done with my slides, okay. I see what I've done. All right. And also we see in Genesis 15, verses 13 and 14, the Bible says here, and he said unto Abram, know of a surety that thy seed shall be a stranger in the land that is not theirs, and shall serve them, and they shall afflict them 400 years. And also that nation whom they shall serve will I judge, and afterwards shall they come out with great substance. So we know that here that God has promised Abraham that his seed is going to go into a land that's not theirs. They're going to be afflicted for 400 years. We've already established tonight in our conversation that they were there for 430 years. God also tells Abraham that he's going to judge that nation. If you remember from our Ezekiel study, what was one of the nations that God was going to judge in the book of Ezekiel? Egypt. So we see God already pronouncing judgment there in the book of Ezekiel. Exodus 12:40 tells us now the sojourning of the children of Israel who dwelt in Egypt was 430 years. They spent that time frame down there. But I want you to look at this too, because the promise in verse 14, and we're going to go back to the first chapter or second chapter here in just a few moments, folks. I don't have many slides tonight. I have more notes than I do slides. But God said that they would leave there with great substance. Remember when Jacob and his family came, they didn't have a whole lot. There had been a famine in the land, was the whole reason why they were down there. I mean, to start with, and then Joseph inquired and asked for his father to come, and he came down there, but they didn't have a whole lot. And God promised Abraham that they'd leave there with a great substance. And in verse 35 of Exodus chapter 12, the Bible says, "And the children of Israel did according to the word of Moses." You find that word in Ezekiel chapter 11. "And they borrowed from the Egyptians jewels of silver, jewels of gold and raiment. And the Lord gave the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, so that they lent unto them such things as they required, and they spoiled the Egyptians." Now, when you just read that, you think that there is some deception on the part of the Israelites, but that is not the case. I have talked to people about this before as well, going over that, and they're like, well, they lied to them, they wanted to borrow it, and they loaned it to them, and then they took off with it. That's not what's happening here. You have to go back to the wording to understand. When you see that they borrowed here, that means that they asked for, and when it was lent, it was handed to them, it was given to them. They weren't stealing anything. But it says that they spoiled the Egyptians, so they left there with more than what they came with. So we see that God promised and fulfilled. So we see prophecy and history here in the book of Exodus. We see God saying something's going to happen, and we see it come to fulfillment. Now, as we normally have been doing, we're going to look at this book and how it's divided. The book of Exodus can be divided into 3 parts or 3 main subjects. I changed that. So Tabernacle should read 24 to 40. Apparently I can't put the right numbers in the right place today. So the book of Exodus can be divided into 3 main subjects or 3 main parts. We find the Exodus in chapters 1 through 18. We find the law in chapter 19 through 23. And the tabernacle in chapters 24 through 40. These are divisions inside of this book. In the Exodus, we'll see the power of God. We'll see the people brought to new life, and they will see their liberty and freedom. In the law, we see the holiness of God. We see the nation of Israel agreeing to be under the law, and we also find their responsibility. And then in the tabernacle, we'll see the wisdom of God. The nation of Israel brought into a new love and fellowship, and the privilege of having God dwell with them. That is a big thing, folks, that we often overlook, is God dwelling with His people there. And we'll get to that hopefully when we get to the tabernacle here in just a little bit. But tonight we're going to begin with the Exodus. And as I said, it begins in chapter 1 and it goes through 18. Chapter 1 is sort of a recap of the last part of the book of Genesis with Jacob and his family. We know that Joseph has died. We know that there's a new king in place who knew not Joseph, and he begins to see how many Israelites there are, and he decides that he's going to do something about it. So they begin destroying all the men children, and and doing away with them. He's afraid that the nation of Israel will side with their enemies, and he begins to enslave the nation of Israel as well. In chapter 2, we see the birth of Moses. All of us have sung that song, right? Moses was in an ark in what? In a river. Hid in what? The bulrushes. He was there after his mama couldn't hide him at home anymore. Pharaoh's daughter finds him. His sister is watching. His sister takes him to, or goes and gets their mother, and his own mother takes care of him, and Pharaoh's daughter pays for that lady to take care of her own child. Once again, and I'm just going to go ahead and say this, and I've tried really hard in this not to go off on tangents, but once again we see what the enemy meant for evil, God turned it into good, right? In that picture. We know that he was raised in Pharaoh's house. He was educated. He spent 40 years there. So he was 40 years old. Moses has an altercation, I guess to start with, and ends up killing one of the Egyptians that was beating a Jewish slave, and he buries him in the sand, and Moses flees Egypt, disappears. Chapter 3, we find the call of Moses. Moses goes to a place called Midian, and he gets married there. His father-in-law's name is Jethro, and he begins to tend to the sheep, and Moses begins to see something that would make all of us stop and begin to look. Moses is looking, and he sees a bush on fire, but it's not consumed. And I thought about that today as I was going over this, what I would have been thinking if I'd looked out the window and one of those hedge bushes out here beside the church was just blazing, but it wasn't going nowhere. And I thought that would have been something else to see. No doubt Moses was terrified, but we know that the Lord began to speak to him, told him to take off his shoes. He's on holy ground. And we also know that Moses had been in Midian for 40 years. So now Moses is 80 years old. Moses is 80 years old at this point. In our day and time, at the age of 80, people's like, I'm done, I ain't doing no more, right? Before that too. So we see the call of Moses in chapter 3. In Exodus 4, Moses comes back and he begins to announce the deliverance, that God is going to deliver his people out of the land of Egypt. The Israelites believe that. Moses is reunited with Aaron. And then in Exodus 7 through 12, we find the 10 plagues that in Egypt. And I don't know how well this picture is going to work. I bet you can't see that as well as I took a picture of another Bible that I have to be able to see these. So maybe I should have kept that back for a minute. Do we remember, us adults, do we remember what all these plagues are? All right. So, these plagues came for what reason? I know we're doing a little bit of Q&A in here, but it's all right. You can answer me. Nobody can see you but me. All right? It was to convince Pharaoh to let people go, absolutely. It was in response to Pharaoh rejecting to let God's people go. And it started out that they were just going to go a 3 days journey and worship the Lord. He's like, well, you can take part, you can take some, no, you can't, and then all of these things. And so as we look at this, the very first one we find in Exodus chapter 7, 14 through 24. 14 through 24, and we find water turning to blood. Now, it's not just the river Nile that turns to blood. It's all their water fountains. It's even water that they've got sitting in pots, whether they were clay or something else. Every drop of water in Egypt turns to blood. And it causes the fish to die, the river smells, the people are without water. However, Pharaoh's magicians are able to duplicate the miracle with something, and Pharaoh's not moved. It doesn't surprise him. They're able to do something and convince him that's what it is. The second one is frogs in Exodus 8, 1 through 15. Frogs come up from the water and completely cover the land. Now, I know some people that come to church with us sometimes, and if a frog was to get within 5 feet of them, they're going to be screaming and hollering and yelling. That don't bother me. But I couldn't imagine frogs being everywhere, all over the place. Again, Pharaoh's magicians duplicate the miracle by sorcery, and Pharaoh is unmoved. He's like, oh well, no big deal. And I mean, if you read through there, you find that as they died, they had to scoop them all up and take them out of there. It wasn't like they just picked one up every 100 yards or so. They were everywhere. Then you have the lice that comes, and all the dust of Egypt becomes, this as a massive swarm of gnats, but that's not what the Bible says. The Bible says lice. And the magicians are unable to duplicate this. They say that it is the finger of God, but Pharaoh's heart remains hard. Everybody's covered with it. It's sad that somebody's heart is that hard against God. And then it was mentioned the livestock, the cattle. All the Egyptian livestock die, but none of the Israelites' livestock is even sick. It's not even touched. Wait a minute, I skipped one, didn't I? I skipped flies. I apologize. Swarm of flies covers the land. Pharaoh promises to let the Hebrews go, but then becomes stubborn and refuses. The only place I can imagine that would be close to this would be when I worked at chicken houses. And in the summertime, I kept 2 cans of fly spray in the truck to spray my truck once I got in there to kill all of them from buzzing around with me. All right? So as bad as we hate flies, could you imagine them just covering a complete land? All right, now the cattle or livestock, all Egyptian livestock die, but none of the Israelites are even sick. Pharaoh still refuses to let the people go. Once again, he's unmoved by what's going on. Then in Exodus chapter 9, verses 8 through 12, we find bulls. Horrible bulls break out on everyone in Egypt. The magicians cannot respond because they're struck with bulls as well, and Pharaoh refuses to listen. Now, I think all of us in here know what bulls are, right? Big old sores that risings, sores all over you, painful, burning, itching. Gives me the heebie-jeebies just thinking about them, right? And yet still, in all that, Pharaoh wouldn't. Then hail comes. Hailstorms kill all the slaves and animals that are left out or unprotected and strip and destroy almost every plant. Pharaoh admits his sin, but then changes his mind and refuses to let Israel go. Well, I know I've done wrong. Yeah, no, I'm not going to do it. Then locusts come. Locusts cover Egypt and eat everything left after the hail. Everyone advises Pharaoh to let the Hebrews go, but God hardens Pharaoh's heart and he refuses. So what the hail didn't destroy, the locusts just leveled. Now there's nothing left for them down there in Egypt. But now those Israelites that are up there in Goshen, they've got everything they need. God's taking care of them. And then the next one we find is darkness in Exodus 10, 21 through 29. Total darkness covers Egypt for 3 days, so no one can even move except Hebrews who have light as usual. So dark they can't even see one another. I know I've shared that with y'all before, but there's a cave system there in East Tennessee that we went to, and there's a room in there that you can experience complete darkness. And Katie, Katie was little at the time when we went, and I wouldn't have known that that youngin' was even there had I not had a hold of her. The only reason why I knew she was there is because she was about to choke me out, squeezing around my neck, because she couldn't see anything. I mean, when you can see just like this and that guy flips that switch and you cannot see your hand in front of your face. That's what I imagine when we go through these and look at these plagues of what's going on here. And then the last one is the death of the firstborn. And the firstborn of all people and cattle of Egypt die, but Israel is spared. Pharaoh and the Egyptians urge Israel to leave quickly. After they are gone, Pharaoh again changes his mind and he chases after them. So, that are the 10 plagues. I tried to cover them. I want to bring something else in here before I go to this next slide. So, I said here in this that all of Israel was spared. But there is a reason all of Israel is spared. And now this is where it's real hard not to go off on a tangent. I can promise you that. Because anybody who has studied the Bible at any point in time knows what is going on here in this passage. Because we see the death of the firstborn, and it wasn't that God said, well, I'm not going to pick on them. There was something that the nation of Israel had to do in order for that plague not to touch them. And we find in this, in the book of Exodus, we find the institution of Passover, that it begins here and in Exodus chapter 12. They have to take the first month and the 10th day, they take a lamb of the first year of the sheep or the goats, one without blemish. The 14th day, they are to kill it at evening. They are to place the blood on the 2 doorposts and the lintel. So both the side posts and the top of the doors got to be covered in blood. They're to take that lamb and they are to roast it with fire and to eat it and unleavened with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. And they're also to eat with their loins girded, shoes on their feet, staff in their hand, and they were to eat in haste. The Israelites did so, and the death angel passed over them. Now, as I said, it wouldn't be hard to get off on a tangent. What we have just seen is a picture of Jesus Christ in Exodus chapter 12. Matter of fact, if you want to get right down to it, when Jesus was crucified, it was during the week of what? Passover. When was the lamb killed? At evening time. So there are a lot of things that go together. How do we get in? The blood has to be applied. What prevents the death angel from us? The blood being applied. Well, preacher, you're saying you're not going to die. This old body might, but I'm going to live eternally in a glorified body. Death has no claim to the child of God because the blood's been applied. The death angel could not enter here because the blood of the lamb had been applied to the door. All right, I said I wouldn't go off on a tangent. So, Passover's instituted. And this is their first one, and it needs to continue, and it does continue on down through time. As we continue to look at the rest of the Exodus, and Exodus 12:33, the Exodus actually begins. Pharaoh says, it's time for y'all to go. Get out. I'm done with you. And so they go, and in chapter 13, they're led by a cloud and by fire. Cloud by day, fire by night. God's leading them where He wants them to go, and they're headed towards Mount Sinai. They come to the Red Sea. And they get to look, and here comes Pharaoh behind them, right? We all know this account. Most of us do. We've heard it numerous times. And what do? Well, same thing people do today. They begin to murmur and complain, right? Moses tells them, stand still and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will show you this day. So God parts the Red Sea in Exodus chapter 14. And in this act, once again, God confirms his power over all things. The Israelites go through on dry ground. And I want to address something right here about this, because this was something, I was a teenager growing up and I seen this happen sadly. But I want you to understand something, folks, that this was the Red Sea, not the reed swamp. I have heard people say that on and off, that, oh, it was just a swamp and it was a dry season, there was no water there, so they went through on that. Well, that's all well and good if that's what somebody wants to believe about them going through there, but you explain to me how the Pharaoh and his army ended up at the bottom of the Red Sea. Because I seen something recently where they're doing dives and sending these automated subs or devices down in there, and they're finding pieces of chariot wheels at the bottom of the Red Sea. Now you tell me how they got there. Well, so it must not have been, no. We find where God parted the water. The children of Israel go through on dry ground. Pharaoh and his army starts coming in after them, and the Bible tells me how them chariot wheels got there. God caused the wheels to come off. And they began to get in fear, and all of a sudden the water began to close in on them, and the nation of Israel seen the dead Egyptians on the seashore. That's how they got there. It was not some swamp that was going through a dry season. God parted the waters because that's who God is, and that's what God can do. And we have this as a reminder today to see what God can do. In Exodus 15, Moses and the children of Israel begin to sing praises unto the Lord for his greatness, for his deliverance, for his might and his power. And then in Exodus 16 and 17, we find once again God's provision to murmuring people. And I'm just going to go ahead and tell you, folks, God don't like murmuring, okay? But God did provide for them both quail and manna. And as I said time and time again, people haven't changed. They were to collect so much each day, and on the sixth day they could collect double to take care of the seventh. They were only supposed to take a certain amount. What do some of them do? Some takes more, some takes less. Just like people today. Only take one. Well, if I take two and that one don't take one, then I've only took my one and the other one, right? But the Bible tells me that when they did that, that he who took more didn't lack anything, and he who took less didn't lack anything. They had exactly what they needed. Their overabundance or their greed, they didn't get them anything extra. So God provides for them, and God brings them to Mount Sinai. I got plenty of time. So now we come to the law. And I tried to find today, and I did not sit and count them out exactly how many laws are in the book of Exodus. I tried to find out today. I was unsuccessful in doing that. But there are several of them. And so the law we find in chapters 19 through 23, and we find the commandments, 19 through 20, judgments and ordinances. So the commandments are for governing moral life. And we find those in Exodus 19 and 20. And at the base of Mount Sinai, the Israelites agreed to do all God commanded. Whatever God wanted them to do, they said, that's what we'll do. Well, that didn't last long. A few more chapters over, you see them doing something they shouldn't be doing, right? Just like us. Lord, if you'll do this for me, I promise I'll do whatever you want me to do. God does what we need. 5 minutes later, we're doing whatever we want to do. I mean, there's no point in us pointing fingers at Israel. But in Exodus chapter 20, we find the 10 Commandments, right? All of us have got them memorized, right? I'm just kidding, folks. I'm just kidding. All right, so 10 Commandments. And I didn't put all the verses that you find in Exodus chapter 20, 1 through 17. First one's, thou shalt have no other gods before me, right? There's only one God, correct? Amen. Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image. Pay attention to that. It'll be important here in just a few moments. Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. Drives me crazy to hear somebody do that. And we live in a world today where people don't care anymore, folks. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. On the seventh day, God did what? Rested. Who instituted the Sabbath? God did. Remember it. Keep it holy. It's important. It's God's law. Honor thy father and mother. Anybody know anything about this law that's important? Lengthen your days. It's the very first commandment with promise, right? Honor thy father and mother, that thy days shall be long upon the earth. I remember being told that as a kid, and I also remember being told, I brought you into this world, I can take you out. I don't think that's what the Lord meant right there, but it is one with promise about honoring our parents. And that honor goes beyond us just being, I know we don't have any kids in here tonight, they're in the fellowship hall, but that goes beyond being a teenager, even into our adult years, bringing honor to our parents, right? So, there's 5 of them. You only got half. Now, thou shalt not kill. I'm going to go ahead and tell you, I believe personally that this goes beyond actually committing murder, but killing somebody with our words as well, too. Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not commit adultery. What is promoted today? Adultery. Thou shalt not steal. Once again, it's even as a piece of candy. Something that simple. Well, nobody will ever know. God knows. God knows. Oh, it's just a penny, or they won't miss it, or it'll be stealing. There's no gray area for us to get into here. Thou shalt not bear false witness. And it goes on to say against thy neighbor. And then let me ask you this question. Who is my neighbor? Everybody. All right. We've been paying attention in other places too, right? Bearing false witness, telling lies, making yourself look better, those kind of things. And as I said, I know we're all adults in here. We've heard all this for years. But it's a good reminder for us to know what this is all about. And thou shalt not covet. Sir, can I use you for an example for a minute? Mr. Taylor's got a pretty red shiny truck out there. I want Mr. Taylor's truck. That's a sign of covet, right? But if I was to look at Mr. Taylor's truck and say, man, I like the way that looks, I want to go get me one similar to that, that is not coveting. But if I say I want what he's got, then I'm coveting. Because a lot of people, well, I don't understand it. Well, there you go. There's your explanation. Thou shalt not covet. Whether it's their house, their whatever, God goes into a list of what it is. Their livestock, their spouse. I mean, it's sad, but we live in a world that these rules still apply today, folks. And I want you to understand something. People today look at it, and I know we live in a country that have taken these out of our courthouses for a lot of them. But what people need to understand today is that the laws of our country, the basis for them all starts on these 10. Matter of fact, a lot of the rules around the world start off of these 10. So we see the commandments. As I said, we find in this, the law, we find these commandments. I'm grateful for these commandments. We're going to talk more about them in a minute. We find judgments under the law, which is governing social life. We find masters and servants in chapter 21, property rights in chapter 22. There's some ethical law that goes in there in chapter 23, verses 1 through 13. And then there's some ordinances which governs religious life in chapter 23, verses 14 through 19. About keeping feast and how many times men are supposed to appear before God on a yearly basis. Does anybody know off the top of their head? 3. And they're not to show up with nothing. They're supposed to show up with something. So that's what we find under the law in the book of Exodus. I didn't want to get into all the different laws and their responses tonight. As I said, I was trying to hit the highlights. But now, I want to ask you this. Why was the law given? Okay, to keep people in line. It's to provide a standard of righteousness, correct? I mean, how do we know what's right or wrong if there's not a law there? Right here in front of the church, there are now speed limit signs that say 45, right? Before they put those up within the last year, people were running 75 down this road. All of us around here know that it was 45, but because that sign wasn't up there, people said, oh, I didn't know. Man done what man wanted to do, and now God has given a law to man to provide a standard of righteousness. This is what righteousness looks like. To do these things. Yet also we find in the New Testament that it is a schoolmaster. It was a schoolmaster that points us to Christ, correct? Once again, something else that's pointing us to Jesus, even looking at the law here. Because I promise you, none of us in here can keep these 10 commandments. Not all of them. We've broken them at some point in our life, and the Bible actually teaches me that if I've broken one of them, I'm guilty of them all, correct? So the law was given for a standard. It's a schoolmaster. It was to expose and identify sin. It points out the right from the wrong. It points out what sin is. Did Adam need these commandments? Yes and no. But more so on the no side, because how could Adam honor his father and mother if he didn't have a physical father and mother? Well, he fell for the same thing, the same deceits that people do still. And the last thing that the law was given for was to reveal the holiness and power of God. Ladies and gentlemen, we serve a holy and a righteous God. He wants things right. He wants us to be holy because He is holy. And so this shows us where we line up at and what it takes, and we see this by the power of God. Now, the last thing that we find here in the book of Exodus is the tabernacle. Chapters 24 through 40. The pattern was given to Moses during his 40 days on the mountain in Exodus 24 through 31. In Exodus chapter 32, I don't know what slide I'm on. Yeah. In Exodus chapter 32, wow, God's man is on the mountain talking with God, the children of Israel become impatient. It's basically what happens. And they get tired of waiting on Moses to return, so they go get Aaron to make them an idol. We don't know when he's going to come back or if he's going to come back, so make us something to worship. So Aaron begins to collect all their gold earrings, and he burns and makes a golden calf. All the while Moses on the mountain talking with God, getting instructions for the tabernacle, bringing down these commandments, these laws to the people that God has written down on these tablets of stone. And this bunch is acting like a bunch of heathens, because they are, right? So, it causes a delay in building the tabernacle. Moses comes down. As Moses and Joshua come down, Joshua thinks that the nation of Israel is under attack, and Moses said, no, it's somebody singing. He sees them rejoicing and doing what they're doing, and he throws down the stone tablets that God's given him and breaks them. It's a picture of how quickly man can break God's law, just like that. Moses has already begged God not to destroy them. As I said, it's a delay in building the tabernacle in the wilderness. A temporary substitute in a tent is pitched without the camp in Exodus chapter 33 and verse number 7. It's not in the camp with the rest of them, it's outside of the camp. In Exodus chapter 34, we find a second set of stone tablets that God begins to make for Moses and is going to give to him. He gives him instructions, and then in Exodus 35 through 40, actually I want to back up here a minute. I did not include it in my notes, but I have pondered on it all day. All right, I'm going to back up to 31, actually, is where I'm going to back up to for just a moment. Because in 35 through 40, we see that all of the work of the tabernacle is done, and in 40 we find it's completed. But I want to show you how God works in this. We always seem amazed when God does something like this, but it's just who God is. God is able to do this. Back when Moses is on the mountain with God for his 40 days and 40 nights, God's telling him everything that needs to be in the tabernacle, right? How it should be designed, how big it needs to be, what kind of wood, silver, gold, what things should be brass, all of those things. And when we get to chapter 31, God tells him here in verse number 2, he says, see, I've called by name Bezaleel, the son of Uriah, the son of Hur, of the tribe of Judah, and have filled him with the Spirit of God and wisdom and an understanding and knowledge in all manner of workmanship, to devise cunning works, to work in gold, silver, and brass, and so on. And you go down to verse 6, and it says, and behold, I have given with him Aholab, the son of Ahisamach, of the tribe of Dan, in the hearts of all that are wise-hearted, I have put wisdom, that they may make all that I have commanded thee. So before God has given Moses instruction, well, we see afterwards here, but I want you to think about it like this. Before the instruction came, God already made a preparation for that to be taken care of. Before the tabernacle was going to be built, God had already prepared people to do the work that needed to be done. And then we find in chapters 35 through 40 that work gets done, and it is by these two men who start this work, begin to finish this work. They work through this whole process. One of the things that you notice in this building of the tabernacle is that Moses sends out a call to all people, asking them to bring in supplies to be able to build this tabernacle for the Lord. And as I was reading through this again and listening to this over the last several days, something really caught me, and that was the fact that people, the Bible says, they were willingly giving. And they were giving all of this to the Lord, and it come to the point that they had too much to work with. And they finally had to ask them to stop giving because they had more than what they needed. You want to know why that happened then and not in today's society? You answered it yourself. Because those people were willing, and most people today, we're greedy. But it amazed me of how they left out of Egypt, and they said they would come out with substance. And I was wondering why God had told Moses to tell them to get gold and silver and fine raiment and all of that stuff. Because as you read it, if you've never read it before, you think, why is God telling them to do all of this? And then we get into the wilderness and we get to Mount Sinai and we find out that God is going to use all of that for the building of the tabernacle, that He dwells with His people out there in the wilderness. So the tabernacle is completed and erected. Does anybody know how long it took them to build this tabernacle? One year. From the time they left Egypt till the tabernacle was built. Now, I'm going to show you a picture here. This is actually in, is it in this one? I don't remember which one it's in. It's in one of my Bibles, and I've seen it, and I've Googled it and borrowed it for here. But this gives us an idea of what their tabernacle would have looked like. And where the Holy of Holies, back here, the ark, the veil, the altar of incense, the lampstand, the holy place, table showbread, and the outer veil. And all of those have some things that we're going to look at too. The outer covering was a badger skin, covering of the ram skin dyed red, curtain of goat's hair, curtain of fine linen, curtains all the way around it. And that's, as you can see on the left-hand side of the screen over there, a size comparison from an American football field to how big the temple was. That's sort of how everything was set up. Well, it's small compared to a football field. So I don't know, I didn't sit down and do the math. Might be about as big as this building. A little bit bigger.
360 foot on a football field.
Right. And it don't really make it halfway. Because this is, what, 40 by 120? Not counting the porch. So something roughly, to give you an idea, it'd be about the size of this building, but the footprint would be roughly the size. And then, these are the furnishings of the tabernacle. The altar of burnt offering, the bronze basin, altar of incense, table of showbread, the golden lampstand, the Ark of the Covenant. Just some things so you can see what God gave Moses instructions on to do. Once it is completed and everything is set up, we find at the end of the book of Exodus that a cloud descends on the tabernacle and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. And the nation of Israel could only continue on their journey when what happened? When the Spirit of God left the tabernacle was the only time Israel could pack up their stuff and begin to go. As long as it was there, they stayed put. Once again, it was a cloud by day and fire by night. I've said all this to cover this rather quickly here at the end, because I want to show you some things that this whole tabernacle in itself portrays Christ to us. These are part of it, but so the tabernacle itself was God dwelling with his people in the wilderness, right? Well, how does that portray Jesus to us? Is Jesus not God with us? Yeah. So we find Jesus there. The Ark of the Covenant, I'll go back to this other one for a minute. The Ark of the Covenant shows us that Jesus is our access to God, right? The table of showbread, Jesus is the bread of life, right? The lampstand, Jesus is the light of the world. The altar of incense. Anybody want to take a guess at that one? Mm-hmm. Does anybody know what the incense represents? Nope. It's all right though. Represents prayer. As you said, a sweet smelling Savior that goes up before the Lord. So it shows us a picture of Jesus being our intercessor. So the curtain back at the entrance, and I apologize, I'm having to go back and forth. But this big curtain that was here, remember later on in Jesus' day, the veil of the temple was rent in twain. How? From the top to the bottom, right? I mean, this thing, when you begin to read out all the layers, I don't see any natural man walking up to it and going, shh. This ain't going to happen. But that curtain there at the entrance shows that Jesus is our only way to God. There was only one way for them to get in through there. The altar of burnt offering, Jesus is our perfect sacrifice. The bronze basin or bronze laver, it shows it was for them to wash in, and that was Jesus who cleanses us. And the priestly garment shows that Jesus is our high priest, because we see all of that in the book of Exodus 2, what Aaron's supposed to have on, how it's supposed to be worn, what each stone was supposed to have on it, what he had on his shoulders, and everything that he carried on him had the name of the children of Israel on it. He had a breastplate that had 12 stones that had each name individually. He had 6 on one shoulder and 6 on the other shoulder, as well on 2 stones. So all of this points out to Jesus Christ, because the book of Hebrews tells us that Jesus is our high priest, correct? So now we've completed 2 books in the Old Testament, Genesis and Exodus. And each one of those books have pointed us to Jesus this far, correct? All right, so that's all that I have. Yeah. That's all that I have for you on the book of Exodus. Now, good Lord willing, we will try to tackle the book of Leviticus next week. As I've already said, I'm glad that we don't live under Levitical law. I thank God for grace every single day. There is, let me double check my math here, 27 chapters in the book of Leviticus. So that'd be what, 4 a day, roughly? We ain't going to get down to how many verses you got to read, all right? 4 a day. All right. That's it, Mr. Bruce, if you will.